Coming up to 7:25. Good morning. You're listening to Breakfast on BBC Radio Foyle. Now, the UN Security Council says it's concerned at the growing number of casualties in the conflict in Gaza, and it's demanded immediate end to the violence. Yesterday, there was intense fighting. Nearly 90 Palestinians and 13 Israeli soldiers were killed. The American Secretary of State John Kerry will go to Cairo later today to try to secure a ceasefire. Let's get the thoughts now of journalist Nabila Ramdani, an expert in Arabic affairs. Good morning, Nabila.
Good morning.
Yesterday has been described as the most deadliest day of the conflict so far.
Well, yes, indeed. And as you reminded your audience, more than 100 people had been killed in one day. But overall, over 500 Palestinians have now been killed. You mentioned as well the number of Israeli soldiers who have been killed in the conflict. On the Palestinian side also, you have 3,100 people injured, and more than 80% of those killed are civilians. So the figures once again show men, women and children being slaughtered mercilessly in an utterly barbaric ground and air offensive, which is utterly disproportionate.
Israel has defended their ground operation by saying it's necessary to target Hamas tunnel networks, which it says it could not do from the air alone. What do you make of that?
Well, any propagandist can argue that military action is justified to deal with an enemy, but Israel is going far beyond the limit of reasonable force. And don't forget that it has actually invaded occupied land. Gaza is, for all intents and purposes, controlled by Israel, and Palestinians' living conditions, which have been described by Cameron as an open-air prison camp. Well, right now the comparison is with an open-air morgue, really. Schools, hospitals, private homes have all been bombed, and the revolting premise is that everything is a legitimate target because Palestinians are allegedly used as human shields. Well, let me tell you this. They are not human shields. Gaza is filled with human beings of all kinds, and the majority are ordinary, decent, God-fearing people who want to get on with their lives like anyone else. And they live in one of the most crowded areas in the world. And, for Israel to drop leaflets or make phone calls to warn before the bombing, doesn't make Israel immune of international law. It doesn't cover Israel legally not to be prosecuted for war crimes. And it certainly doesn't help, because where would you like people to go in a few minutes, effectively, to avoid being obliterated?
The American Secretary of State John Kerry going to Cairo later. How significant, in your view, Nabila, is this move in terms of trying to broker a ceasefire? Will this intervention perhaps turn things around?
Well, we've heard John Kerry saying that he was on his way to Cairo, and the UN Security Council has called for an immediate ceasefire, which is long overdue and should now be imposed. But that is a military problem, and there's a clear military solution which can be imposed by the United Nations. And it certainly should do everything it possibly can to stop the bloodshed, retaliating on a civilian population, mercilessly carrying a campaign which includes infanticide, should be stopped as soon as possible. And if I may draw a comparison, what is going on would be the equivalent of the British Army launching a ground and air offensive on East Belfast during the IRA bombing campaign of the 1980s and 90s. This would amount to collective punishment, and collective punishment is exactly how Amnesty International described Israel's campaign.
Nabila Ramdani, an expert in Arabic affairs, thank you very much for joining us on the programme this morning.